Welcome to Journey Through Sci-Fi. My name is Matt.
And my name is James.
And this week on our journey through virtual reality, we're looking at shady businesses in control of virtual reality technology and all the weird business practices they get up to. So what are the two films that we're looking at this week for that theme, James?
So the two films we're looking at this week are Brainstorm from 1983 and Empathy Inc. from 2018, a more modern day version of these shady businesses. And in both of these films, we've got inventors, scientists, which have come up with this new technology, and it's being used by companies for nefarious purposes. So it's going to be interesting to sort of delve into these two and see what we can uncover in the world of virtual reality.
So let's get started with Brainstorm.
Suppose it were possible to transfer from one mind to another the experience of another person.
Hey, there it is.
Any person, any experience.
I'm telling you, it works.
The test, sound, taste?
Everything,
Smell.
everything, 100%. In fact, better.
Did you have a breakthrough or not?
Yes.
I'd like a demonstration. Knock my socks off.
So Brainstorm from 1983, directed by our old friend Douglas Trumbull, director of Silent Running and special effects artist on 2001, was it?
Yeah, 2001, Close Encounters of a Third Kind. I think he did some stuff on Blade Runner. He's like the special effects guy. Like he's getting on a bit now. I think what is he, like 70? I've got it up here, 78. So he's still kicking. He's still doing special effects stuff.
You can still make movies at 78.
Yeah. Well, this is the thing though. This film, Brainstorm, is the film which made him not want to make movies anymore.
Oh. Well, I know that the kind of the biggest behind the scenes story about this film was Natalie Wood's death, which I know is shrouded in some degree of mystery and unsolvedness. But I don't know how much that would have reached Douglas Trumbull, because that happened after production had finished on the actual film, didn't it?
Well, there were scenes which they hadn't shot yet, apparently. And that sort of like put the film in jeopardy at one point, because they were near the end of the film, like the production and everything. And then obviously Natalie suddenly passed away. They still had some principal photography to do. And the studio executives basically wanted to kill the film at this point, because they were like, right, we can't do anything without our lead actress. Let's just claim insurance on the film. Douglas Trumbull had sort of like last say on this. And so the decision came down to him. And he said, no, I want to complete the film. I want to sort of get it done. So he has like, there's a few shots in there apparently where Natalie Wood's character is like played by a double. So I would not have known this if I hadn't have sort of read up on the film afterwards, because you can't tell, can you?
It wouldn't have been my guess, but there's certainly some scenes where there's maybe some clunky dialogue and slightly jarring moments. I don't know if that's just the film and the way it's made, or it came about because Natalie Wood wasn't there to like fill out the scene as intended. I'm not too sure. Certainly the ending I found quite abrupt, but I don't know if, I mean, you know, films aren't shot start to end in that way, are they? So I've got no way of knowing if that was a later shot or not.
Yeah, the final scene is a tricky one, but it's also quite emotive. But I know what you mean. It does seem sort of like there isn't quite that final resolution in this kind of film. Like, it's a commercial film, isn't it? You'd expect some sort of last bit potentially to sort of like round things off.
Yeah, I mean, actually, to be honest, it's just the dialogue that's very strange that wraps the film up. It's just a sort of a strange half line from Christopher Walken, and then the kiss, and that's the end.
Well, I think I read somewhere that they were both drunk when they shot that scene.
There's a couple of scenes that made me wonder.
Yeah, maybe that's why the dialogue's like not quite all there, because yeah, they're both a little bit tipsy.
There's actually an amazing scene about halfway through where they basically have like an argument, a couple's argument out in public, you know, where they're being followed by some government stooges and they're out at a restaurant. They're just yelling at each other, you go to hell. Yo, you go to hell too. Oh, you go to hell. You go to hell. They're just going back and forth like that. And I actually thought it was a very strange scene, but it was a very good scene because it looked like a real argument because they were both being quite silly. It was a very childish argument, but I could really imagine a couple having that argument out in public in a really embarrassing way. But I did, now you say that, I now wonder if maybe there was a little bit of booze on set involved, or it was just a great bit of natural, half-improvised couple fighting stuff.
Yeah, I really liked that scene as well, and I got the same impression as you did. It felt a little bit strange coming from sort of like the obviously scripted dialogue beforehand. But yeah, that's kind of like childish relationship they have. We'll get into their relationship on screen a little bit more as we go on. But just to go back to sort of like Douglas Trumbull and his difficulties with Hollywood. So he'd had all these sort of like issues with getting this film actually on screen in the first place. But there was a whole other thing as well. So he wanted it. So obviously he's a special effects guy. He's really into sort of like innovative technology, and that this film is like focused on innovative technology. It's all about virtual reality and how you would use that if it was a technology which existed in the way that it does in this film. So he wanted this to be shot in something called show scan. And basically what that is, it's a projection which is 60 frames per second. Now, normal film projection is about 24 frames per second, I think. And when you watch a film, you kind of get the shutter in between. So there's like little moments which with the flicker, which you would not normally pick up on. We're also used to watching films, but Douglas Trumbull really believed that kind of took people out of watching a film. So he wanted to try and sort of like make it as realistic as possible. So he was very much for this new technology, this sort of like 60 frames per second on 70 millimeter reels, I think it was. So he wanted like big projections, like as real as possible, as quick as possible, to get every single bit from real life in these action scenes, to sort of like get rid of motion blur as well. All of this kind of stuff is what he was really pushing for. And he wanted this to be a show scan film so that all of the virtual reality moments, the memory moments, they looked real. So it felt like you were in this virtual reality. But it didn't sort of happen in the end. I don't know exactly what happened with show scan. I think show scan is still happening now in some shape or form, because obviously Douglas Trumbull is still making, well, he's making films. There hasn't been any releases for a very long time, but he did mention he was making a new feature in sort of 2016 or something. But again, I don't know if that's surfaced. So since show scan, he's got involved in Magi, I think it is, new sort of like technical cameras, 3D and 4K, and now he's gone to like 120 frames per second. So he's really on this sort of like, he's got a mission to try and make film as realistic as possible.
That's very interesting. It sounds like he was slightly ahead of his time. 70 mil is, that's IMAX size, isn't it? That's absolutely massive. And there are people who do stuff at 60 frames per second. I don't like 60 frames a second. You can switch video games to 60 frames a second on some of the newer systems. I'm not a fan of it. And I think it's very strange that he says he wanted to do that because it looked more realistic. Because when people talk about the soap opera effect of TV and film, they're talking about a higher frame rate. Which gives it a sense of unreality. I don't know if that's just because we're all 100 years psychologically deep in 24 frames per second cinema. If they were doing it 24 frames 100 years ago, but there's a substantial back catalogue of films at that frame rate that we just associate that frame rate with a form of reality that we're used to. So that looks real to us. I don't know, but I'm not a fan of things shot at a particularly high frame rate unless you're planning to slow it down for slow-mo. I think it looks very odd.
Yeah, and I think it is sort of like because we are so programmed to watch things in the frame rate that we've seen so many films in, the sort of 24 frames per second.
But I thought 24 frames per second was arrived at because it was the closest to how the human eye processes movement and processes images. Or is it just like, is it just the slowest frame rate you can shoot at where the movement becomes imperceptible to the human eye?
I think initially it was to sort of just avoid flicker, because obviously when you're switching between frames and the shutter speeds, the more you do that, the less of a flow you get. So I don't know exactly what the reasoning was. I'd be really interested to find out. So if anybody knows the actual reasons why it was this kind of frames, please get in contact. Inform us. This is all stuff we really want to know about.
Nevertheless, I appreciate Douglas Trumbull's work ethic here. This whole developing new camera systems and shooting films in a completely revolutionary way because he's just interested in the technology and the fact that it's taking him years and years to create a film. I mean, it's all very James Cameron, isn't it? It reminds me of that. Yeah,
well, he has worked with James Cameron, obviously, on a few different things. I think he worked on Avatar in some shape or form, and I think his sort of show scan technology was kind of used a bit for the 3D versioning of that.
Oh, right.
Yeah, so he's really rooted in all these special effects. And I mean, since sort of doing film, he's become more of a special effects guy again. He's done sort of like rides and sort of theme park experiences, all this kind of stuff. He's very into sort of like the actual technology of film.
Well, that's cool. He sounds like a real, like he's been right at the heart of sci-fi, but kind of maybe not in the spotlight for a long time.
Yeah, definitely. A very interesting guy. But obviously, talking about sort of sci-fi and technology, this film is all about technology, isn't it? It's about the Brainstorm project. It's about this virtual reality that these scientists are creating.
Yeah, it's kind of about the birth of an all-new technology, isn't it? The very opening scene is in this lab that they're working in, and it's a fantastic set design. It's such a detailed lab. It looks messy in a really realistic way. It doesn't look over the top like Sci-Fi lab. It just looks kind of like a messy place where professional scientists work full time, and there's just kind of stuff lying around, and everything looks like it has a purpose. It looks amazing. And they are testing this new headset thing and just putting it through the ropes, and it's the sort of the first successful test of this technology. Did you catch the name of the technology at any point?
I don't think I did, you know. It was sort of like I just looked at it as like a VR headset, but I found the way that the technology sort of develops throughout the film really interesting, because it's like its purpose changes, its look changes, and it slowly gets more and more commercialized, doesn't it?
Yes, there's a whole thread of the production element of the company that they're working for, and Mike, Christopher Walken's character, has no real interest in that. But that's what his wife does, isn't it? They work together because she works for the product design wing of the company that they work for. Yeah, and like you said, it all starts in the lab, and it's very sort of grassroots technology at the start. They've got this sort of like massive headset which is all covered in wires. It's all like rooted into the back of a chair or something. But this new technology, it's experiencing things which have been recorded by someone else, isn't it? So that they sort of go through all the five senses, like we mentioned previously, are so fundamental to experiencing a virtual reality. So they do it in sections, don't they? So at the very start, Christopher Walken's character, he's plugged in and he's experiencing what this other guy is going through. So he tastes some weird stuff, doesn't he? There's like peanut ice cream and hot sauce or something random. And then, yeah, he goes through different bits after that, doesn't he? Like all the different senses. Yeah, and there's a great moment where they lift the leg of Gordy, who is the transmitter test, and they whack his knee with one of those little hammers to make his leg swing up, and it makes Christopher Walken's leg swing up and kick the table, which is a great little visual moment to show how it's working. And then what I loved about this opening scene was Gordy then goes into like the bit of the lab where they keep the chimps for experimenting on, and hooks up one of the chimps, and it's like implied that Mike is having kind of a traumatic experience. Like his face looks really shocked, and he's really like, he's shuddering, isn't he?
Yeah.
And it just takes this weird dark turn, like immediately in this opening scene. It's a very like cheery scientist exploring new technology scene, and then Gordy just does this incredibly weird and menacing thing and hooks him up to a chimp.
Yeah, and at that point, I didn't know where it was going to go. I was like, is this going to have some sort of psychological impact on Michael Brace, Christopher Walken's character, or is he just going to be fine? And I think it's playing with that at the start, isn't it? It's like, this technology could be used for something different from its intended purpose, but will it, won't it? Who's going to sort of get control of it?
Yeah, it sets up that dangerous potential and also sets a bit of a tone for like how the characters aren't necessarily going to be very responsible with it. You know, people do reckless things with the technology throughout the film, and it keeps coming up. So it sets that tone early on. It's a great opening scene. This 5-10 minutes that start is fantastic.
Yeah, it's really good. And I mean, it's setting up Gordy's character as that kind of guy who's going to abuse the technology a bit. So like, that's one of the things he does in the film. Like, one of the major bits is when he gets the headset and he goes through all these different experiences. So he's like riding a horse, he's going down a flume at a water park, and then he has sex wearing the VR headset. And that's when things get a bit darker, don't they? So he's turning it into, basically like we talked about in the previous episode, he's turning it into like a wank bank. It's like virtual porn. It's like having sex without having sex. So then already then it's becoming like a commercialized product potentially, but it's also got that sort of like seedier side to it.
Yeah, and that made Gordy a really interesting character because he's got a slightly chaotic nature. He's mischievous and he's a little bit unpleasant. But because of the way the film develops, there's much worse characters with much more high level, globally nefarious intentions for this technology. So Gordy becomes more impish by comparison, but he's a bit of a nasty piece of work, and he's got this nasty streak to him that we see right at the beginning, and yeah, like you said, throughout he's doing the sort of seedier things with the technology, but he sits in between the characters. He's kind of in the middle morally because there's much worse people in the film than him with much worse intentions.
Yeah, definitely. And they're kind of like hinted at throughout the beginning. So as soon as this technology becomes a thing, you're seeing more and more shady characters hanging around the building. They're sort of having secret meetings in cars. They're watching them. You know something bad's going to happen with this new technology, but you just don't know what.
Yeah. So we talked about the technology itself and how it's transmitting the five senses. I found that really interesting. You know, traditionally we talked about in the intro episode how VR traditionally would just be sight and sound, and we were wondering how these films might pick up on that, and Brainstorm picks up on that because there is no like visor equipment. They're getting these images, and we're shown that through the editing, but they've got their eyes open. I found that really interesting. I wasn't quite sure what we were supposed to intuit from that, if it just takes over their optic nerves and they're not getting any signals from their actual eyes, or if they can see two things at once and they're just experiencing things together. But it doesn't. I guess it doesn't really matter, does it? It's just how it is.
Yeah, I think you're right, because it is taking over their senses. So I think one of the best scenes that illustrates that is the boardroom scene, where they give all of these executives, investors, these headsets. And like you said, they've got their eyes open. You can see they're sort of enjoying their experiences. There's a whole crazy sequence where they're driving around in a car and you're seeing it from like a POV, so point of view, and then it suddenly flies around. So it's like they're experiencing flying as well. So there's all these different sort of things that they're feeling, and you can see it on their faces. And then again, that's illustrated in the moment where they're at a party, and then there's a couple of waitresses, and then all of the male executives are like, oh yeah, look at these girls. And then you can see the face of the one female in the meeting room, and she's not impressed at all at this sort of like seedy thing that's going on there.
Yeah, it's interesting what you said about the POV in that scene with the car as well. I found that very interesting and a bit strange because in the kind of earlier stage of the demo to their boss, they send Gordy out to just go and do a load of fun things. He goes down a water slide, he goes horse riding, all of this. And it's all just POV shots that he's recording for that demo. And then immediately we get into the next stage and it kind of like shifts up another level. Like the camera's flying through the air, that could be POV, but there's that specific shot of the truck where you're looking at the front of a truck that's speeding down a road. And then it's sort of suggested that the truck goes flying off the edge of a cliff. And then it switches to the point of view of the truck driver. And that's where it starts to become a bit more like, how is this filmed, within the universe of the story? Like, was someone in a truck that went flying off a cliff? Presumably not. But it becomes a bit unclear. But I guess the point is that it's just creating this fantastical sequence of images for the executives, and it's not too important how it was created, but that's the kind of feel of those early VR scenes. It's just like amazing point of view shots, isn't it, of impressive things.
From our perspectives, we're watching it just as an amazing scene that's taking place on the screen, but it's just trying to picture what these people are going through when they're watching them, because they're not just watching these images on a visor, like you said. They're feeling them. They're sort of like feeling the air on their skin. They're smelling their surroundings. They can hear what's going on. It's all of this full-on immersive experience that they're going through.
Yeah, and crucially, the big twist that this film puts on the VR concept is that it's covering all five senses and transmitting that, but yeah, they've got emotions in there as well. There's like this extra layer of feeling that can be recorded, and that becomes an important plot point. Michael then uses that to like reconcile with his wife after things aren't going well, because he's able to record their shared love through his memories, and then let her re-experience that and re-feel those emotions, which I found really interesting because the film didn't quite get into it. But what did you think of that behaviour on Michael's point? Like, that's on the face of it quite romantic, but he's selectively editing emotions. I found it a bit strange.
Yeah, it's a really interesting concept, that, and I think they really focused in on the communication aspects of this kind of technology. So it becomes like almost like telepathy. So you can read someone's mind, but you can also make someone else feel how you're feeling, so you can have that shared experience again. So I think because Michael gives his wife Karen his feelings through the VR device after he's felt how she feels about him. So he's first testing it out, and then she flashes back to a moment they had an argument, and then he suddenly sees himself through her eyes. So he's kind of getting that whole new experience of something that he's already been through. And then his sort of like emotions and everything about their relationship sort of come to the surface. And then when they sort of like reevaluate how they both feel about each other by sort of sharing those experiences from both sides, their characters kind of shift a bit as well, because I felt there were moments when Michael kind of acts a bit like Karen, and vice versa, in that sort of like that montagey sequence when they're really sort of reconnecting.
Yeah, and that is that I think is the original intended purpose of what they're doing. Although I did notice that it's a little vague. They have these conversations about, like you said, it's about communication for them, and that's what they say they're trying to do, is like create this new level of communication. But that's kind of vague, isn't it? Like that's not that's vaguely defined, I guess, like what they're trying to do, whereas the more seedy sexual uses of it, or even the military uses of it, are more clearly defined. You sort of know what those characters are going to do with it. So I found that interesting. But yeah, that montage of them getting back together and becoming like a stronger couple, I guess that's the representation of what they could be doing with it and what they wanted to be doing with it when they were creating it. And yeah, I suppose it's okay. I guess I wasn't sure about Michael editing out the bad bits, because he does do that when he first starts putting the tape together. He gets rid of like some bad memories for them. But I suppose that's okay, isn't it? Like, it's no worse than like coming to your partner with a scrapbook of photographs after an argument, or, or whatever, or making a mixtape, a romantic mixtape or something like that, reminding someone of the best parts of your relationship. I suppose that's okay, isn't it?
Yeah, I think that's what his intention is, because it doesn't seem nefarious in any way when he's doing this. I mean, there is the other side of it as well, that Michael has been having an affair with his lab partner from the sounds of it. So that's part of the reason why they've broken up. Did you get any of that? Because I'm not sure if they explicitly say it.
I was definitely confused because Christopher Walken and Louise Fletcher behave like a romantic couple, not in a overtly flirty way, but they're bouncing off each other in like a chatty way, and it seemed like they were set up as the romantic leads of the film. And I think he makes a comment about her looking good, looking nice, or looking sexy, or something like that. But that was as far as I thought I saw it getting. Do you think there was more going on with it?
They kiss a few times. And
romantically kiss.
Yeah, well, you could probably interpret it as both ways. But also there's a line that Karen says, oh, you could just sleep at the lab. I know Lillian's there all the time. So it's like, I don't think they never explicitly say, but the main thing at the start is that Michael and Karen are selling their house and they're having a rocky time. It looks like they're going to separate. And from like my perspective, when I watched it, it might have been me assuming, but it was strongly sort of implied that there's something going on with Michael and Lillian potentially. Whether it is anything or not, I'm not 100%, but that's what I got from it.
Oh, yeah, that completely washed over me. But yeah, I definitely picked up on them seeming like they were a couple before it was made clear that Karen was his wife. Huh. Well, he didn't put any of that on the memory tape that he made for Karen, did he?
No, he did not. But I mean, there is so much going on in this film, and I think part of the reason you probably didn't get that, and probably it's not as explicitly put, is I feel like the character development isn't perhaps as strong as it could be, because there is so much going on and the focus is the technology the whole time, because you spend most of the film wondering what's going to happen with this tech, or like what else is it going to be used for, and they keep bouncing around the different things that it could be possibly used for, like the sort of the communication aspects, the military aspects to it, the sort of like sex device it could be, and the sort of like addictive nature of it as well, because it's kind of like all consuming for these characters. This technology has taken over their lives, especially for the guy who's like plugged up to it and experiencing like that sex scene, and he's like properly impacted from that, isn't he? Because he's like on there for hours and hours, and then afterwards he says like, it was more than just sex, it was like a whole new experience.
Yeah, but he doesn't, it doesn't sound good. Well, actually he does kind of say that in a good way, doesn't he? But like when Michael snaps him out of it, he's like grabbing at Michael and like begging, like abstractly begging for help, like he's comatose almost, and it does not look good. But then he is sort of wistful about it and saying that like, oh, I was more than myself, or something like that. It's strange, isn't it?
He's behaving like he's got withdrawals as well, because he keeps flashing back to that moment that he's been plugged into constantly for who knows how long.
Doesn't he nearly collapse the next day as well? Or he has a sudden headache, or a few days later. Yeah.
Dies from an orgasm.
What a way to go.
We blew it, didn't we?
We sure did. I didn't understand.
Nothing's changed.
You feel so good.
So do you.
Yeah, like you said, character development, I think, is taking a bit of a backseat to technological development in this film. Like, Douglas Trumbull is more than capable of doing good character development and interesting characters. Like, we watched Silent Running. That's just, well, one-man character study. It's incredibly good. But I guess that what was, especially what you said about the stuff that he was working on behind the scenes, he was in his techie-minded, minded prime, I think, here. And he was really trying to Well, I don't know if he was trying to, but intentionally or not, he was crafting a film that reflected his obsession with technology. And I think that's a really interesting insight into the type of filmmaker, production designer, special effects artist that he is, in his core.
And a film in 1983 looking at these concepts and visualizing them in such a way, I mean, the depiction of the VR headsets and how they look aren't that far off from like an Oculus, are they, and stuff like that, which we have now. So it's very forward thinking in everything that it's doing, even though it might not be executed in a filmic way in terms of characters which grab you as much as perhaps a different kind of film.
Yeah. But it's so realistic in terms of product design, and the way they walk through that process of just stripping it back to its bare necessities to make it smaller and more streamlined. That's a very realistic process of product design, isn't it?
The fact that the military takes such an interest in this project as well is really interesting, because they see sort of like the military applications of this kind of technology straight away. Like, what if you could be in a jet and then fire a missile just by thinking about it? That's going to make their troops more efficient, because they don't have to like press buttons or anything. They can just do things without even thinking. And then there's the sort of like the torture side of it as well. What did you think about the psychological examination tape that Michael stumbles upon?
Yeah, that's where the film takes a really dark turn. So originally the military, like you said, is like they're thinking about like missile guidance and stuff like that, and it's a little bit abstract, their ideas, but they're excited about it. But I think is it directly linked to Lily's death that allows them to go down this torture route with Project Brainstorm? Because so Lily dies, she has like a heart attack or something. It's a bit weird. She just sort of like drops dead in the lab, but I assume it was a heart attack because she's depicted as quite a heavy smoker. But she has the sense of mind to grab the headset and record what she's going through, and then this tape kills anyone who watches it, kills Gordy, almost kills Michael, because it's forcing the viewer to have an experience of death. And I got the sense that that's where the military came in and saw how powerful it would be if it could be weaponized, because you've got this tape of someone going through death, you play it to someone, it kills them. What if we had a tape of someone being tortured? What effect would that have? And then I assume that's the logical steps they went through to get to that moment.
Again, it's cutting out the middleman, isn't it? Because they don't have to actually do these things. They can just play a tape and it does it for them. So for them, it's a genius idea.
Yeah, it's like really efficient cruelty. And it's such a great scene. It's a great concept and it's a great scene. Michael stumbles upon the tape, but we don't actually see the much of the torture. It's introduced with a formal introduction, a senior government person sitting behind a desk with he looks like he's giving an official address. It looks almost like a presidential address or an emergency broadcast or something like that. And he's basically just warning the viewer, like, turn this off now. You have 10 seconds to turn this off. You're about to see a psychotic episode or something like that, or experience a psychotic episode. It's just so good. It was very scary. It was such a scary concept and so well done. And the fisheye lens, so it's all like bent around and it gets more and more bent as they pan in. God, it was so good.
The public service announcement nature of that just makes it scarier, because you know what you're in for. It's got that extra layer of impact, doesn't it? So that when Michael's kid ends up putting the headset on, you're like, oh shit, this is going to be bad.
Yeah, that public service announcement thing makes it seem more evil as well, because it's so official and it's so like, it's a representation of the government, but it's them saying we're about to do the worst thing imaginable to you, and we've planned it and we're doing it deliberately, and this is a whole operation and sanctioned by the government, and this is what we do. And that whole edge to it, that Black Ops edge, was horrible and unpleasant, and really like that's what sets the tone for what I was saying before about Gordy being more impish and mischievous, because you've got people like this old man sitting behind a desk giving you a warning.
Yeah, they're not testing it. They're not like stumbling upon it. They've purposefully made this to torture people, which is horrendous.
Which means they tortured someone as well to record the tape in the first place. And that's just never, they don't go into who that was and what happened to him and why. Yeah.
So it's crazy the way that human beings would go from using a communication technology to show someone something nice, something hopeful, to sort of rekindle relationships, make people become closer to one another because they know how the other one is feeling, into something terrible, so that you are sort of like inflicting the most pain possible on someone. And this made me think about Donnie Darko, because there's a scene in Donnie Darko where they talk about the goggles that they put on kids to give them nothing but nice images when they go to sleep, so they grow up well adjusted. And then the first thing the teacher says is, what if you put horrendous things in there? How will that affect them? And this is what's happening in this film.
And Michael's son, has a breakdown. And is never seen again, I don't think, in the film.
Yeah, they say he's going to recover, but we never really know, not by the end of it.
Yeah, that's actually how we get to that weird you go to hell scene, because they just very strangely get packed off to like a weekend retreat while he's in hospital. They just get sent on a little holiday break, which I thought was very strange.
Also, the you go to hell scene, like thinking about it now, it's purposefully staged by them, isn't it? Because they're trying to trick the government agents into thinking they're having a big argument so that Michael can hack into the system. So it's got that extra layer to it, even though we sort of like, we're talking about it in terms of just the scripting. It's scripting on scripting, isn't it?
Yes, I kind of forgot about that. Yeah, so maybe that was the awkwardness. Yeah,
me too. But it does stick in your head.
But yeah, what you were saying about that change in the tone of the VR scenes, going down this horrible route with the torture thing, and the breakaway from the amazing, point of view shots early on. I liked how it was kind of going down two branches in the second half of the film, because you've got this horrible route that the government's taking it, but Michael is all the while trying to pursue the other route, which is communication and understanding. He just wants to watch the end of Lily's death tape. She's had this near-death or pre-death experience, which is basically her life flashing before her eyes, right? It's like a technological representation of your life flashing before your eyes, and then beyond that as well. So Michael wants to see all the memories that she saw at the point of her death, and then this surreal, almost, not dissimilar to 2001 trippy sequence where it's kind of like flying through space. He's just obsessed with like chasing that down and finishing that and understanding this profound moment that we all go through of death. What was your take on all of that whole like near-death experience, visualization and more? Because it's not just visuals, of course.
I found it really fascinating. So the fact that it's like an out-of-body experience as well. So you physically see her body, and the camera does the POV as it's been doing throughout. And it's established as, when you get these POV shots, you're experiencing what someone else is experiencing. So already you're seeing a POV where she's seeing herself. That's kind of like when you know something strange is happening. And then, like you said, the live flashing is brilliant. But then it takes it one step further, because when he goes back into it towards the end in the final scene, you see all of these other kind of things flashing up. And it is life after death is what they're showing. And they show like a version of hell as well at one point, which was really disturbing. Like there's these people, it's like a quick flash, blink and you miss it kind of thing. But there's people in like pods, and it's like, I think in the production they refer to it as like the crew's term for it was the cancer hell. And it's sort of like gory looking shots of tormented souls. It's so quick compared to what they show afterwards, which is all the really nice visualizations of like what looks like heaven. And like I said, the 2001 bit, before that, you get this kind of like flashing and the universe, you're seeing the earth, you're seeing sort of like where the soul goes, presumably. And for a film which is so rooted in its science, to have quite a spiritual ending, I found like an interesting choice.
Yeah, I found it interesting. I found it a little bit strange because the kind of final moment that Michael sees before Karen kind of pulls him back into the real world is angels flying up to up to a bright light. But they're very clearly angels. You get clearer and clearer images of them. They are winged humanoid things flying towards a light. It was just a bit strange because there are obvious religious implications to seeing what happens at the point of death, which was what Michael was trying to do. But that just hadn't been mentioned at all. Michael approaches it as a scientist. He's interested in it scientifically, but he doesn't acknowledge the religious implications of it. And then they just kind of hit that right at the end, and then he's snapped back into reality by Karen. So it just feels a little bit like having your cake and eating it. It's like you're either going to be doing a film about the religious experience of life after death, or you're not going to talk about that. Whereas they just sort of touch on it right at the end. And I felt a little bit cheated that it wasn't really putting one foot firmly in that camp and discussing that.
Yeah, I think sort of because this film is so much about them discovering thing after thing. Like it's constantly like they start off, they do this simple experiment, they realize they can create a sort of a virtual experience, and then it's like how it's used after that, and then the government can take control of it. And then it's just all capped off by this spiritual experience that Michael has, knowing that there is life after death, and just the implications of that just seem so much bigger than the technology he's already made. And it's sort of like it kind of, yeah, like you said, it kind of overshadows the other stuff.
Yeah, and then, like I was saying at the start, then he comes back too, and that's where he just says his weird little line at the end. He's like smiling, you know, he's had this profound experience, but he just kind of like turns to Karen and goes, "We made it. Look at the stars." And that's like the last line of the film, and it's very mysterious. It's a very strange thing to say. There's something about Walken's delivery that I think maybe doesn't communicate the profundity of what he's experienced, because he's just sort of like giggling and a bit giddy. But it's an odd ending.
I think the fact that it's in the same spot where we've seen the flashbacks earlier kind of gives it a little bit more weight, because it's the spot where you see them have that emotional scene as a couple, and they're talking about the guy who invented the first plane and sort of that experience, and sort of like the joy of invention and what it will lead to for future generations, all that kind of stuff. It's all implied at that point. But like you said, it's kind of like it ends on that line, and then that's it.
Yeah, and then they get wrapped up in one of these bubbles of memory that have been the visual representation of Lily's life flashing before her eyes. So as you were saying before, she had like an out-of-body experience, but then that image became a bubble amongst many bubbles, and the bubbles had her memories sort of laid over them. And then Mike and Karen kiss, make up, and then it kind of like pans out and they've just become another one of them, which is a nice way to end it, I thought.
Yeah, it ends on a happy note, doesn't it?
And he's also hacked the company's system and done this very zany and strange scene where he like disrupts the whole production line and destroys it. That felt very tacked on, like they had to kind of wrap up the evil government plot and make sure they don't get away with it.
Yeah, exactly. Take the technology away from them before they can use it for any other nefarious purposes. So speaking about technology and nefarious purposes, that is the theme of today's episode. Shall we talk about Empathy Inc. now?
Oh, yes, please. Hi everyone, we hope you're enjoying the episode. We just want to take a quick moment out from the episode to let you know what's going on the Patreon feed of Journey Through Sci-Fi.
So this week on Patreon, we are revisiting our old friends Bill and Ted, and we're completing the trilogy. We're looking at Bill and Ted's Bogus Journey and Bill and Ted Face the Music. So here's a little snippet from that episode now, so you can get a little taste of what's happening over on Patreon.
By the time we catch up with them, they're doing like Peruvian throat singing with a theremin and bagpipes.
Oh, so good. So good.
Yeah.
And it's like, it doesn't sound bad though, does it? It's like...
I thought it was quite good. It was melodic.
Yeah, so it's like they know what they're doing now. It's just they've gone on a completely different path musically to what you'd expect.
Yeah, they do know what they're doing. And that was something I really liked in the way that they had aged the characters, because they are still pretty simple and pretty dumb, but they are believably matured from where they were at the end of Bogus Journey. They are competent musicians. We've seen that. They did their 16 months of intense guitar playing. They can genuinely play guitar now. They're competent musicians. They can make music. We see that. They have genuinely grown up, but they are just, they're held down by this prophecy and this destiny, and they can't move on with their lives because they truly believe, and they have very good reason to believe. They've been there, they've been to the future.
Told, yeah.
They believe that they're going to write this music that will change the entire world.
And I've got to say as well, Keanu Reeves and Alex Winter, they sort of rekindled this friendship on screen so quickly in this, and it's just like, it's like being back with old friends. And like, I wasn't sure if it would still sort of work seeing the two of them together, sort of like, given how much time has passed, but I thought they were great.
Let me ask you a question. If you had the inside track on the next big thing, how much do you think you could scrape together?
What do you make?
We sell virtual experiences. Walk a mile in the shoes of the less fortunate, and when you wake up, no matter what problems you have in your real life, feel that much better.
Probably is a pretty big market for something like that.
Thank you, sir.
Okay, Empathy Inc. from 2018. I had not come across this film before until we started doing the research. Now, it's available on Arrow Video, and Arrow are known for sort of like putting forth cult films. They're very sort of like into these sort of like indie ones which build up cult followings. So what did you know about this film going in?
Absolutely nothing, James.
Fantastic. That's how you want to go into these low-budget sci-fi indie films, knowing as little as possible.
So we both watched the trailer as part of our research for this to find these films. So I just knew as much of the trailer, and the trailer depicts it as a very gritty thriller about a VR company, and it absolutely delivered on that. That's exactly what it is.
Definitely. It's shot in black and white, so it's already moody and sort of noir, thrillery in just its visuals. So the main premise is you've got this is me just literally reading the bio. It's a venture capitalist discovers the sinister plans for a new cutting edge technology called extreme virtual reality. So, I mean, even in the name, extreme virtual reality, you kind of like know something bad's going to happen, don't you?
Yeah. The reason I asked you if you caught the name in Brainstorm of the technology, because I don't think the technology is named in Brainstorm. I like it when these films create a personality for the product in a way. Like XVR, they call it XVR. It stands for extreme virtual reality, but they refer to it as XVR. That's a great name for the thing that they're creating. And then on top of that, the company that they work for is called Empathy Inc., because that's what they're offering. You go into XVR, you experience life as someone less fortunate than yourself, and then you wake up back in your own body. You feel safe and happy and grateful for everything that life's given you, and they're selling that to rich people to make them appreciate their lives. That whole product that they've created fictionally is perfect. It's such a clever idea, and it feels so whole and rounded.
And it builds on the ideas we've seen in Brainstorm, the idea of using virtual reality and VR technology as a means of communication. So they can sort of they are supposed to be gaining a sort of empathy with these poor people who are less well off than them, who are struggling. So it's supposed to, the intention is that it will bring people close together and make them thankful for what they have. But as we know, something like that, something as altruistic as that sort of idea, isn't usually how mankind will use this kind of technology.
Yeah, well, it works. We see it work the way that it's been promised it will work, because the main character Joel, like you said, he's a venture capitalist, a failed venture capitalist, but this is like a big break for him to like get his life back together and make a good investment. But he insists on trialing the technology, so he does it and he loves it. It works as promised. He comes out of it like a new man. He's talking to homeless people on the way home, and he's just, he's on top of the world. But then we get into the real meat of the film, of course, which is that things aren't as they seem. But I loved the way that everything was kind of hinting towards that. Like you said, it's filmed in black and white. It makes it look a bit grittier and grimier, but there's a lot in the set design that's really backing that up as well. Like XVR is in a manky warehouse, and it's all like, hodgepodge together with a sort of janky helmet, and you get pumped full of drugs. It all felt a bit grimy. It's very secretive. It was all just a bit like too good to be true. Obviously, I mean, the vague plot from the trailer, but even the way it's kind of presented to you, it's like, this doesn't seem nice. This doesn't seem good.
Yeah, and it's sort of like the film sets up this disorientation right from the start, because the very first scene it seems bizarre, doesn't it? It's just Joel on stage, and there's a spotlight on him, and he's doing some sort of scene. He knocks on the door, and then it cuts to like a knock on his door or something like that. So then you're sort of invited into his world. You see, like you said, he's a failed venture capitalist. He's now living with his girlfriend's parents. Everything's gone wrong for him. And then this guy comes to him with this premise for XVR. If you can get $1 million, then you can sort of like get in on this new big venture which we're starting up. But he's very reluctant to tell him what this venture entails. And like you said, Joel wants to experience this so he knows if it's real or not, because he's already had a bad experience with this other sort of venture which he was doing, which was like to do with carbon energy or something like that. And either way, it didn't work. It was all fake. It was never going to work. So he's already got these kind of like expectations. He already knows that he needs to check out this technology before he can really buy into it.
Yeah, he's suspicious, isn't he? And rightly so, because he's been burned. He's going in on this deal with an old school friend who's got the nickname Sleazy VZ. Everything. There's so many warning signs that you do feel sorry for Joel, don't you? He's a venture capitalist, but he is clearly bad at his job. He's trusted the wrong people before, and now he's going into business with Sleazy VZ in this manky old warehouse with Lester, who's the kind of man who does all the tech side, who also just, I mean, he doesn't seem too trustworthy, does he?
He looks pretty gross as well.
Yeah.
Just to put it, I can't put it in a nicer way. He looks gross. He's in this sort of like you said, this dark dungeon of a lab doing these experiments, and it all just seems wrong, doesn't it?
Yeah, it's a fantastic performance from Jay Clates, who plays Lester. You've played Grand Theft Auto 5, haven't you?
Yeah.
He's Lester from that. The guy that the guy on the phone who's like running all the operations for the gang but doesn't actually get involved in it. That's Jay Clates, and he's basically playing quite a similar character, but he's a much nastier piece of work in Empathy Inc. And he's absolutely brilliant. They all are, to be fair. And we'll get into it later, but there's some characters playing different roles and different versions of themselves, which I've said many times before is something I love in film. And they do it in this film brilliantly as well.
And this is the second time we will have seen that in a virtual reality film as well. So we saw that previously in 13th Floor.
Yeah.
So seeing it again here it seems like it's going to be a running thing, which we're going to encounter this series.
Yeah, of course. Yeah, because that's what VR allows you to do. It allows you to step into a new role. You become like an actor playing a role, and that's a big theme in this film because Joel's wife Jessica is an actor. And we've seen this weird, strange scene at the start that's on a stage and is very performative. So there's this theme of acting and being in a role and being in a part that's a big part of the film, which really reminded me of the film Possessor, which if you check out our Patreon, you can hear us talking about the new sci-fi film Possessor. That's got a big theme about using the technology to play in a role, and it does a similar thing in that film.
Yeah, I think Possessor's very close to this, and it's sort of in its themes and the way it's executed. Obviously, completely different styles of film, but there is a lot sort of linking the two of these. But let's talk a little bit about XVR itself and what that experience is like for Joel, because he's really enamored by this, putting on this headset and going into this world. So what did you think about that and how they deal with that and set it up in the film?
Yeah, it was cool. It's built up in a really good way because we've got some rules of XVR, which really reminded me of last series on the show when we talked about the rules of time travel. It's a big thing in time travel films to have a set of rules that you must stick to, otherwise there will be universe destroying ramifications or you'll die or whatever. Lester introduces it in a similar way to Joel. There's these 3 rules. Stay where you are, don't go through any doors, don't underestimate XVR. It can be disorientating. It's not your real body, and never ever look in a mirror. That was the best one. Avoid mirrors at all costs. That sounds so just, full of menace, doesn't it? Like, don't look at yourself because you'll go crazy. And I think Joel breaks all of those rules over the course of the film, doesn't he?
Yeah. I mean, in the very first time he tries the headset on and goes for this XVR experience, he's just in a locked room, isn't he?
Yeah.
There's like a black cat, and that's it. So he doesn't really see anything, but all he's got is like a can of tuna or something to eat. And like he throws up in the toilet. He's having a really bad time. He is sort of like, he's down on his luck. He doesn't know sort of what's going on, but he's having this experience of being poor and sort of trapped.
Yeah, and they use like a restricted point of view shot, so the field of vision just takes up the very center of the screen in a small rectangle. It really reminded me of being John Malkovich, when they go inside John Malkovich's brain and they kind of see the world in that a similar tunnel vision way, don't they? It was a similar style to do that.
And we talked about Viewmasters in our introduction episode, and that's the kind of experience you get when you look through one of those, like the little goggles, little binocular kind of like vision that you get when you use one of those things. Yeah,
it was an interesting stylistic way of doing it to represent XVR. But I guess we should talk about what XVR really is, right? So there's a twist midway through the film. I have to say I kind of saw it coming because of other films that we've watched recently. I was expecting something like this to happen. It's not virtual reality like we've been told it is. It's not a virtual simulation. It's much closer to Brainstorm, isn't it? You're literally experiencing things as another person, but in Empathy Inc., you're kind of stealing their body. Basically swapping minds with them temporarily.
Yeah, and this is kind of like, because even before you find out that revelation, the experience of XVR is addictive. So Joel wants to go back and he wants to experience it again after just being in that locked room. He wants to find out more about it. So he has another experience in the machine. And then when he does, he's running around as this guy. And like you said, he breaks all the rules. He sees himself in the mirror. He sees what he looks like. He goes to a grocery store or something. And does he steal something? I can't remember.
Yeah, he steals an apple and then ends up getting chased by a policeman and then gets in a fight with the copper.
Yeah, and because he's treating it like a video game or something like that, he feels like he can do what he wants. So he finds the whole experience really exhilarating. But he doesn't really know what's happening. Like you said, there's a body swap angle going on. This is where the film does take that dark turn, because when they sort of put on these headsets, they are switching roles with someone else. They are becoming that person, and vice versa. That person is becoming them. So it's a whole different kind of experience. It's not a virtual reality. It's someone else's reality, which again is exactly what we saw in Possessor. You see characters being taken over by someone else, and someone else is interacting as them.
Yeah, and it's a theme that's hinted on in World on a Wire, and more so in the 13th Floor, stepping into someone else's body, but they're a real, full living sentient being, and then they lose their autonomy because you've forced your mind into their body and taken control of it. So we're getting into that same idea of losing your autonomy through the technology.
And whilst all this is going on, there's lots of news reports about sort of like increased killings. There's people going missing. All of this stuff is happening sort of in the background of the film. And later on, we find out that sort of the clientele for this technology isn't the sort of clientele which want to have this empathy experience that Empathy Inc. is trying to sell. They want to enjoy the darker side of things. They want to be able to do what they want, to kill people, to beat people up, to have no rules. They don't want to be feeling like a poor person. A lot of these rich people that are using this technology seem to be using it to sort of like to flex their power almost, which I found quite interesting.
Yeah, it's pretty sick. It reminded me of Hostel, the setup of Hostel. Like it's just like a playground where horrible rich people can just go and kill people as much as they want indiscriminately and in the most awful ways. And that's basically the service that Nicholas and Lester are offering. You pay us a huge amount of money and you can go and do awful things to people. And I guess the premise is that they've got no reason to believe it's not virtual reality, I guess. Is that right?
Yeah.
So they're kind of going in and they do honestly believe that they're not committing a real crime. They're just like you said, treating it like a video game.
Yeah. They're living out their fantasies without any consequences.
Yeah. But it has these real world consequences. Joel sees a newspaper and he recognizes it because he looked at himself in the mirror in XVR. He recognizes the man and he's been arrested for, just a litany of crimes. So he knows immediately that it's not just the assault on the police officer, which is what he did when he was in control, but there's all sorts of other charges on this man. So this man has been used by so many of their clientele to just do horrible things, basically.
But also going back to the idea of the body swapping itself. So Joel managed to strike up a friendship with a homeless woman who was outside the coffee shop, which he regularly went to. And you see a few scenes where he's sort of like, after he's had this experience with XVR, he's got his empathy. He gives her some money. He really sort of like, he feels thankful for where he is in life, even though he's had all these troubles with money and stuff, with his past sort of investments and things like that. But then suddenly this homeless woman goes missing. No one's seen her. And people are talking about an argument that Joel had with her, which he doesn't remember. So again, like in 13th Floor, you're seeing characters which don't have memories of certain times. They're blacking out almost.
Yeah, at first I wondered if he was just losing memory and there was some other psychological thing going on. He actually had done something horrible, but the effects of the drug and the technology were making him just forget. But he has these two separate characters, both verify the same story. You yelled at this woman, you were really nasty to her. And it turns out that he's, while he was out doing whatever in XVR, someone used his body. I was a little unclear on what was going on here. Someone took over Joel's body, beat this woman to death and filmed it so that they can blackmail Joel, basically. And that's what they do later in the film. But who was it that was inhabiting Joel's body at that point? Because a lot's happening in the film at that point, and it's where you first learn that it's a direct swap. And the mind that you go into is coming into your body, which to me implied that it was the young man that Joel had taken control of who killed that homeless lady. But then why? Why would he have done that? I didn't understand that.
Yeah, I don't think it was that moment, though, looking back at it, because I think, so Nicholas and Lester, they have set up a blackmail service, basically, to try and sort of make sure that their investors don't go back on their investments, basically. So I kind of assumed that at some point, they'd done the swap with Joel. I don't know how they did it, because the fact it's filmed as well, I don't think that guy that Joel jumped into would have had it filmed or anything like that.
Sure, yeah. Yeah, exactly, yeah. So unless he was forced to by Lester and Nicholas while he was in Joel's body, or I guess the conclusion that I came to by the events of the end of the film is that it was either Lester or Nicholas, and it was done maybe at the same time, because there's 2 chairs later in the film and you can swap minds more than once and into different bodies. So yeah, I assumed that maybe Lester or Nicholas took control of Joel's body while he was in the XVR experience the first time, did this horrible thing for blackmail purposes, and then just popped him back ready to come out of XVR, I think.
Yeah. Well, it wouldn't have been the first time, would it? Because in the first time, he gains the empathy and he's talking to the homeless woman after that.
Oh, yeah. Yeah, sorry, you're quite right. So when did they do it?
Yeah. Yeah, this is the thing. It's so tricky. And this film does sort of, it plays around. You're constantly suspicious about what's going on. You're trying to put the puzzle pieces together. And as it goes on, you find out more and more bits.
Listen up, because there's rules. Number 1, the code is unstable, so stay in the environment you wake up in. Don't go opening any doors, all right? This is for your own safety. Number 2, don't underestimate XVR. It's gonna feel like your real body. It's not your real body. It can be kind of disorienting. Number 3, avoid mirrors at all costs. Seeing yourself in somebody else's body can kind of fry your brain.
I should mention, I did just have a big meal before this.
I'm serious. It can cause anything from delusions to flashbacks. You don't want it. Right? I'm gonna be monitoring your experience. If you break my rules, I will unplug you. Right? I'm not gonna risk everything I worked for just because he gets curious or stupid.
So Joel obviously finds out what he's invested in. He finds out that it's bad news, basically. People are being killed with this technology. He wants his investment back. He wants nothing to do with it. He's getting paid from it, but it's not worth it. He knows that people are dying, so he's a good guy when it comes down to it. He's trying to get rid. But Nicholas and Lester are having none of it.
Yeah, he's kind of a good guy. I found him a very interesting character, again, in a similar way to Gordy in Brainstorm, although he's not as unpleasant as Gordy in Brainstorm. But he has got some loose ethics, for starters, he told his wife he wasn't going to get her parents involved in this product, in this investment, because it's too risky. He goes behind her back. He does that anyway. He's kind of caught up in this shady operation. I think, he knows it's a bit shady and a bit weird because of the, for the same reasons we know it's shady and weird, the way it's presented. It's this backstreet operation that he's not allowed to talk about, and it's all a bit strange. But he refuses to go to the cops, ostensibly because he will lose his in-laws' money if he does that, and it'll just be gone. But I do think there's an element of no, I'm wrapped up in some messy business here, and I'm going to take care of it myself. He is a good guy. He is doing the right thing and he's sorting it out, but he's not going through the proper channels to do that. And it leads to even more messiness in the final act of the film.
Yeah, he thinks he can solve everything himself. He reckons he can blackmail the guys. He can get the money back. And it just gets worse and worse, doesn't it? Like the things that he tries to do, you can see them going wrong from the start. And it all sort of really starts to take the turn when the body swap technology gets used again. And he jumps into Lester's body to try and sort of convince Nicholas to give the money back to himself. So what did you think about this? And then when they started really body hopping about, and I know you said earlier you love it when actors play multiple characters in the same film. That's where we get all of this, don't we?
Yeah. So Jay Clates gets to go from being the nastiest piece of work in the film, Lester, who the more we learn about him, the worse he gets. He's going into XVR to have sex and murder people, just as much as the clients are. He's
raping people, isn't he? It's horrendous.
Yeah, he's a real piece of shit. But then he becomes the character of Joel. Joel takes over his body, so he is now playing Joel, the hero of the piece, racked with guilt. And then also Joel performing Lester. So Joel takes Lester's body out to see Nicholas, like you said, to try and blackmail him, I guess, or just turn the tables on him and sort things out. But he has to pretend to be Lester. So you've got the actor who plays Lester pretending to be another character, pretending to be Lester. It's brilliant. It's such a good scene. And he stays in that body for the remaining, most of the rest of the film. And yeah, loved it. Really just found it really exciting. It turns it into a real thriller. And the thrills of it sit on the actors' performances, which is, when it's done well, is just such an entertaining thing to see.
And it just escalates and escalates, doesn't it? So Joel manages to track down Nicholas. He gets the money back eventually. He ends up killing Nicholas. And then when he gets back to try and switch bodies back with Lester is gone. Now, this bit I found really terrifying. So the idea that someone else has just run off with your body and you don't know where they could be, how to track them down, this is like a terrifying prospect.
Yeah, the note that he leaves him, have fun in my body, see you never. That's great.
Yeah, and we've already talked about how sort of Lester looks in the film. Lester is sort of like an overweight guy. He's really grubby. Joel is sort of like this business guy. He's sort of clean cut. He's lost all of that, and now he's just Lester, who is just a bit hapless.
Yeah, and so he's lost his body, he's lost his self in that way. That point is then driven home by the next scene. So Joel in Lester's body goes back home to Jessica, and they have this scene where she kind of forgives him for everything and accepts him in this new body, and then starts to quite forcefully come on to him and try and have sex with him, ostensibly to show him that she's okay with this new body that he's got. But it's very suspicious. It's immediately suspicious. And you sort of figure it out moments before it's revealed, but Lester's taken over Jessica's body, so there's even more body hopping, but also this idea of the discomfort that he's feeling in this new body is rammed home to him by his wife also behaving so strangely and not in character and being a different person and trying to force herself on him, but it's not really her. All of that is just magnified even more in that scene.
And again, virtual reality being used for sex is such a big thing here, because Lester says when he is in Jessica's body, he says there's nothing like having sex with yourself.
Yeah.
It's like, it's so weird, but it's the kind of craziness that virtual reality and this body swapping technology is sort of like all centered around in a lot of these films.
Yeah. And it says a lot about Lester's character as well, that line, doesn't it? Yeah. He's an interesting guy.
Grubby Lester.
Yeah, but a narcissist as well.
You ever read the Bible?
No.
Yeah, me neither. But there's a verse I memorized. There is one who pretends to be rich and has nothing. Another pretends to be poor and has great wealth. Proverbs.
It's a good slogan.
It's the truth. Walk a mile in the shoes of the less fortunate, and when you wake up, no matter what problems you have in your real life, feel that much better.
Probably is a pretty big market for something like that.
So all of that builds up to, it's basically a Mexican standoff, isn't it? Lester is now in Jessica's body, and he brings them all together back into the grubby dungeon room that is the Empathy Inc. warehouse, and he's going to swap them all back, but he also wants to immediately kill them. So that he's got to set up this kind of 3-way swap where he will be able to immediately kill them once he gets control of his original body. So he's got to hit the button and toss the gun to his original body at the exact right moment so he can pick it up and kill them, which is like, it's fraught with tension, and you know it's going to go wrong somehow, but you're not quite sure exactly how it's going to play out, and it's very exciting, isn't it?
And watching this film, like going into this film knowing nothing, I could never have predicted this is how it would end as well. This crazy, like you said, Mexican standoff. It's intense. You don't know what's going to happen at any given time. What bodies are going to get switched? How's it going to end up? And it builds up more and more tension through this scene. You've got Joel, who is now being taken over by Jessica, trying to sort of get rid of this tape, which is binding her hands. You've got Joel, who is now at this point still Lester, sort of seeing that and trying to figure out what to do. And then you've got Lester in Joel's body with a gun and like trying to switch everyone around. It's just mad.
Yeah, and so last second, great bit of an explosion of violence just at the end of the film that works really well. It was almost Hitchcockian, you know, like the build up of there's not a great deal of violence. A lot of it happens off screen, but is implied, and then it all just builds up into this moment of extreme tension, and the violence actually happens on screen. Joel, as Lester, just stabs himself in the leg at the very last second. I was a little bit disappointed he went for his own leg. I thought he'd stabbed himself in the belly. Like, I thought he was really trying to, like, kill Lester as he went into him. They're wrestling over the gun. Jessica gets shot. Lester gets his brains blown out all over the floor. It's just such a great crescendo to all the tension of the film.
And I found it interesting. You just said, like, they don't show you this violence. Again, it's a virtual reality film where it's got extreme violent moments and people living out their violent fantasies. Whereas in Possessor, which we talked about earlier, which we mentioned is a Patreon episode, in that one, they show you these extreme moments. So it seems more hard hitting, but it's just as powerful in this where they don't show you.
Yes, yeah. And it works well in this because it fits with the kind of noir thriller aesthetic of it. I think this film's going to age really, really well. I think it's going to look good for a long time. And withholding on that violence, I would have to guess as well, withholding that violence is a budget issue in this film. The most you see is a lot of blood at moments, which is fairly easy to do, especially in a black and white film, to do that on the cheap. But they're doing a lot with a little, and they're being economical with the violence and with the special effects that they need to show that violence. So it works really well. But yeah, we have this final scene. Lester's dead. Jessica's been shot. So you can kind of see how it's going to play out. As soon as it's happening, Joel straps himself and Jessica back in and transfers their minds once again so that Jessica can live in Joel's body, it's a great ending for like a mad science film, which is what this is, because he saves her. It's a happy ending, but it's tainted happiness because she's lost her husband and she's also got to now live this weird life, away from her own body and in her dead husband's body, which is going to be an incredibly traumatic and weird life for her, isn't it? It's a great dark ending to the film.
And it's like we said earlier, the moment when Joel is in Lester's body and realizes he can't get back in his own one, that's sort of like even more powerful at this point, because so Jessica is in her husband's body, and that's sort of like someone she spent most of her life with. They've got that intense relationship, and then suddenly they've switched. So it's just like a whole different experience. And then trying to sort of be yourself, but knowing that you're someone else. It's like, I think that would be a whole, like, that is quite a scary prospect in itself, isn't it?
It's body horror, isn't it?
Yeah.
I think Mike needs to watch this film. I think he'd love it.
Yeah, it's body horror, but of the mind as well,
Yes,
because
yeah,
your mind
absolutely.
in someone else's body. It's so much going on in this, and it's interesting because you think it's going to be a sort of down the line virtual reality film, but it's looking at reality in a different way, and I think that's really interesting, and that's something that we're just sort of discovering in this series, that virtual reality isn't always just like going into a computer game, that's your reality, a simulation. Sometimes it is changing your reality and experiencing someone else's reality. That's kind of like a virtual reality in itself.
Yeah, and it's good to see these films where it's about these different types of technology that allow you to have those experiences, yeah.
And the communication themes are really coming out as well, aren't they? And experiencing what other people are feeling.
That's a big one in this one. It was a big one in Brainstorm as well, yeah, definitely. And what you were saying before about how she's now got to figure out who her sense of self is, that's how they wrap up the film, isn't it? Because we get resolution on the mysterious opening scene of Joel on stage. That's like a performance, because what he was saying on stage was he's talking about to thine own self be true, but what self is it? What self within yourself of the many selves you are should you be true to? Which is a very mysterious opening line. But now we see that it's actually Jessica, who is an actress who is making a life for herself, it seems, as an actor in Joel's body, and bringing all of that experience onto the stage. And it's a really powerful ending. And also you're seeing shots of the audience, and they look quite, rapt and, really into it, and very, very mesmerized by the performance. So I got the sense, I was inferring from that she'd really found her niche as an actor through the experiences that she'd been through, because she hadn't been, she'd got bad notes throughout the film. She wasn't particularly successful, but this audience is, just stunned silence watching her performance, her one-man show. So it's worked.
Yeah, because her whole life now is acting. She's having to act in a role for the rest of her life.
It left a brilliant question mark about exactly what the performance was that Jessica / Joel was doing on stage, because it's not clear. You just get some bookended quotes for the film. Was she doing like a one-man show that was the story of the film, where she told her life story and how she came to be in that body? Or was she just doing a scripted performance, but she was bringing so much of herself as an actor that it made it so powerful because of her actual life? You don't know. You don't know what the play that she's doing is actually about. But it's a great bookend, because it did make me think this story would make an incredible one-man show. If you just watched Joel on stage, if you went to a theatre and watched a man tell this story, and the twist is that it's the wife in the body, that's great. That'd be a great little one-man show to see, like Edinburgh Fringe or something, wouldn't it?
Yeah, definitely. I'd love that sort of spin on it as well. That just makes it even more powerful.
It's like a Twilight Zone ending, and I say that, and you know full well that I've never watched the Twilight Zone, but it feels like that, doesn't it?
I was thinking that the entire time. All it needed was Rod Serling to come out at the end and just be like,
yeah,
in the Twilight Zone, because it's got that kind of vibe to it.
Yeah.
But that's what makes it so good. Those stories are science fiction at their best, where they've got like a slight twist, but they are focusing on the characters and their experiences. And this just has all of that.
Yeah, and this film is science fiction at its best. I think if it wasn't clear from everything I've said for the last half hour or so, I'm in love with this film. It's really, really good. And I'm reluctant to compare every good indie sci-fi film to Primer, but it's got that feel of the low budget and the ramping up of the complexity and the complex ideas on a low budget and relatively simple filming. It has all of that, and it's the thing that we love, isn't it, James? Low budget sci-fi, complex ideas, well executed.
Yeah, definitely. It's 2 big thumbs up from us.
So in this film, we saw Jessica take on the role, and she's talking about being true to thine own self at the beginning, and we have this powerful ending from that. Next time on the show, we're going to be looking at some films that raise those questions about the nature of your identity and doubting your identity, and that's the theme next week, doubting your identity. So what are the 2 films that we've plucked out for that VR experience, James?
First off, just before I tell you the next films, I am very excited about talking about both of these. So the first one we're going to be talking about is Total Recall from 1990. Arnold Schwarzenegger, come on, do I need to say anything else? It's a brilliant sci-fi classic. And we're also going to be looking at Open Your Eyes from 1997. Now, this This again is a brilliant film. It was adapted as well as Vanilla Sky, so you might be more familiar with that. This is sort of like the source material for that. It's a really great virtual reality sci-fi experience. It's going to be a good episode.
That's going to be fun. It's good to get Arnie back on the show. And maybe one day we actually will get Arnie on the show, James. Maybe that can be an aim.
Imagine.
So anyway, join us for that. That's going to be a lot of fun. In the meantime, if you want to get in touch with us, you can send us an email, journeythroughsci-fi@gmail.com, or you can find us on Twitter, Instagram, and Facebook. Come and join our discussion group on Facebook and say hello.
If you'd like to support the podcast, you can find us on Patreon. We have a page up on there so you can donate, so we can continue giving you great episodes of the podcast and bonus exclusives as well if you get on the right tier.
And you can also leave us a review. That's a really great way to support the podcast as well. But that's all for this week. Thank you so much for joining us, and we'll talk to you next time.